we're in a series called Friend of Sinners, and it's been an incredible series. And I want to preach today from this thought: don't miss it. Don't miss it. Have you ever heard a joke? You ever hanging out with somebody? Any joke tellers in the room? Let me see your hand. You're funny. You're a joke person. Let me see your hand. Okay, cool. Right on. We have no funny people in our church. This is exciting. This is what a fun group to be around. I'll tell you that much. Wow, that's amazing. Have you ever heard a joke and one of two things kind of either happened? Either it was kind of there and it happened, but you didn't really you didn't get the joke, right? Come on, you ever not gotten a joke? And so you do one of two things, right? You either fake laugh, right? You either fake laugh and you kind of and you ask your friend about it later. I don't really know what that word that he used was. I'm confused. Or you just kind of stand there awkwardly, right? And I think what happens sometimes if we're not careful in church and even in relationship to Jesus, I think there can be a lot of amazing things going on. And if we're not paying attention or if we're kind of not really focused or if we're not aware of what's happening, then we can actually miss something that actually could have brought a lot of joy. It actually could have changed our perspective. It actually could have changed our thought. And so really today when we walk out of here, my goal is that we wouldn't miss what relationship with Jesus provides. That we wouldn't just kind of be navigating and we wouldn't just be like Christians, in title only and in world religion philosophy, but that when we walk out of here, there would be this thing inside of us that says, no, man, I love Jesus and I know what the benefit of that relationship brings. And I want to read out of Matthew chapter 9, verse 9 through 14. It reads like this. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, this is presumably Matthew's house, it says, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, right? Here's another scenario now where Jesus is hanging out with the wrong people. And the Pharisees saw this. They said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? But when Jesus heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but to call sinners. Come on, let's pray together today over the preaching of God's word. God, we thank you for your word. We're grateful, God, that it is a light unto our path. It's a lamp unto our feet. And God, I pray that you would open up our minds today, that you would soften our hearts. God, that we would be able to hear the things that you would want to speak to us. Lord, I pray that every word that I would say today, that it's just of me, God, that it would fall to the floor. But if it's by your Spirit, God, I pray that those would be the things that would resonate in our hearts. God, change us today from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. I've really discovered that it can be hard to hear what someone is saying if you don't really know them. Or maybe sometimes it's hard to get kind of what somebody is saying if you don't really know them in a particular context. Now, one of the things that I love about our church is that, Christine and I, we love doing ministry together. And so it's so fun because we get to be in so many meetings together, right? We get to be in a lot of meetings. And I remember early on in the life of our church, now a lot of our staff have worked with me before, and they've been in a lot of meetings with me before, but they haven't been, and they hadn't at this point early on in the church, been in as many meetings with Christina. And so we were all in the meeting. We were all in a meeting one time, and I thought it was like a normal. I would call this like a normal meeting, like not incredibly eventful. We talked about some important things, but not a wildly eventful meeting. And then some of the day goes by, and one of our staff members, one of our core staff members, who shall remain nameless, comes up to me and he says, "Hey, is Christina mad at me?" And I go, "Why do you think she's mad at you?" And he goes, "I don't know. It just seemed like she was really intense, and I think she's mad at me." And I go, "No, that's just the way she talks." I go, "No," because he had never been in a meeting with her before. And so what he had done is he had confused her intensity with frustration. And I said, no. And now, you want to know what's funny? Like 2.5 years later, he never asked that question anymore. Right? Because now he knows how we operate in meetings, and so he doesn't confuse. And so the better you know somebody in a given context, the better you can actually hear what they're saying. Because oftentimes what we hear is predicated on our relationship with the communicator. Oftentimes what we hear, how we hear what we hear, it's predicated on our relationship with the communicator. Some months back, I had a good friend of mine who's also a pastor, was in town, and we were going to play golf, but we stopped into the church just to grab something real quick. And when I stopped in, one of our team members was like, hey, I got a quick question. And we were talking, right? And again, something that I would call like a normal conversation in our context. And we get in the car, and my buddy goes, wow. He goes, man, I knew you were direct, but you're really direct. And I said, well, yeah. And what I began to explain to him was the history that I've had with that staff member, right? Because, John Maxwell, right, the leadership guru, tells us to sandwich things, right? So if you're gonna talk to somebody, you should tell them how awesome they are, and then you should kind of correct them, and then you should tell them how awesome they're gonna be in the future, right? That's good leadership. That's just kind of the way it's supposed to go. But what I've learned in context is, yeah, but if I have a relationship with you and you know that I love you and I've sacrificed with you and I've been through the thick and the thin with you and I've laughed with you and I've cried with you, then I don't really need a sandwich, okay? Just tell me what you need from me, and we don't gotta be cute, and you don't have to John Maxwell each other, and we can just say, hey man, this is what I need, and we go, awesome, this is what we need. And what I begin to explain to him is that there's context for relationship, there's a history there. And so when we interact in such a way where there's so much equity of relationship that we're not easily offended, that we're not easily bothered, that we're not easily disturbed. There was another time when we were out to dinner with a couple from our church, an amazing couple from our church, and we were out, and during the dinner, she's a very strong personality, and this person that goes to our church, and during the dinner, she had said something during the dinner that honestly, again, because we have relationship with them, I didn't give two thoughts. And she had said something, and it was actually really sweet. She was like, oh, you need to not worry about that kind of stuff at all. Like, we can take care of that. And she said that, and I was like, oh man, that's really gracious, that's really kind. Well, later, Christina and I got a text from her, and she said, I'm so sorry, I should not have said that like that. And I was like, said what, like what? I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, I just told you what you should be involved with at the church and what you shouldn't. Like, that wasn't what I meant. I go, no, I know what you meant. You were actually being really kind, and you were actually being really sweet. Again, why didn't I even think of it? Why? Because of relationship. It's amazing how relationship changes conversations. It's amazing how relationship gives context to what we are saying. I meet with people all the time. Meet with people all throughout the week. And you wanna know what I always do? I always give them the vision of Grace City Church, whether they ask for it or not. Like, they don't even have to ask for it. Like, it's eventually gonna come down to the calling and to the mission that we have here at Grace City Church. And here's why I do that, is because it is easier to serve something that you've captured yourself. It is always easier to be a part of something. It's always easier to serve something that you yourself has captured. Jesus is having the Last Supper with his disciples. And there's this scenario that comes around where Jesus pretty much says, one of you is gonna betray me. Like one of you is gonna rat me out. One of you is gonna betray me. And the Bible says that there is this disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. Now, presumably, John wrote this about himself. Right? So John says, and then there was this guy, the one whom Jesus loved. It says that he was leaning up against Jesus' chest. That he was actually leaning up. And then I love Peter, right? Because Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. John, the disciple, is leaning up against Jesus. Peter was sitting a little further away, and it says that he signals to John, ask him who it is. Peter said, ask him like I'm already in the scriptures enough saying dumb stuff. You ask him. And it says that the disciple was able to ask him why, because of proximity, because he was already leaning up against his chest. I really believe that the physical posture of this disciple represented his spiritual pursuit of Jesus. And what I have found to be true about my own life is that the more that I lean up against Jesus, the more that I press into Jesus, the better I am able to understand his heart. That changes everything as I pursue him. And here's my point. My only point today is this, is that friendship with Jesus illuminates what he desires from us. Friendship with Jesus illuminates what he desires from us. Sometimes I talk to people all the time and they're like, well, what does God want from me? And what does God want from me? This is what I always tell them. I don't know specifically, but I do know that if you draw close to Jesus, you will begin to get some specifics. He will begin to paint in the picture, but you got to draw close to him. Sometimes we just want like a distant God that just hands us a plan. But the reality is when we lean into Jesus, we begin to get these things. And I love where it goes in verse 9. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he rose, and he followed him. Now, any readers, let me see your hand if you're a reader in the room, like you read. Let me see your hand. Okay, cool, right on. That's, okay, again, discouraging, that's like 30% of the room. Let me see your hand if you're honest, you're like, okay, I'm not really a reader. Like, let me see your hand. Like maybe I read Twitter and Instagram, and that's about it. Okay, cool, right on, right? Yeah, you're not really a reader. Now, I am not a reader that has forced myself to become a reader, okay? That is kind of what category I would fall in. But for me, the context in the place with which I read matters a lot. Like if you're a reader, that's usually the case. Usually like where you read. Like I have literally walked up to coffee shops, put my hand on the door, walked in and went, nah, and left. Because context matters so much for when we read. Can I just tell you, context matters a lot when you read the scriptures. Whenever you read the Bible, the context matters. Like the space matters. The place from which you are reading the Bible, it makes a really big difference. And can I just encourage you, read the Bible within the context of a friendship with Jesus. So when you read the Bible, like, come on, you ever having like conversations with people about the Bible and you feel like you're talking about a completely different book? I talk to people about the Bible all the time. I get in rando conversations with people about the Bible, and I'm like, I don't think we're talking about the same thing. And the reason that we're not talking about the same thing is because we're reading it from different contexts. One of us is reading it from the context of friendship with Jesus, and the other one is reading a book. And when you read a book, it is going to be a dramatically different experiences. Everything changes when you start following Jesus. And so Jesus invites Matthew into friendship, and then he starts teaching him. So Jesus invites, he says, hey, Matthew, come follow me. He doesn't give him a sermon. He doesn't say, bow your head, raise your hand, pray this with me. Dear me, come into my life, make me brand new. Like, he doesn't say that, right? He doesn't say that. What does he do? He says, hey, come hang with me. Hey, I'd really love to spend time with you. And because what Jesus instinctively knows that if I can engage in friendship, then the teachings will matter so much more. That if actually we're friends and we're hanging out and we're spending time together, then when it comes time to teach, now this person is able to hear it because this person will know that it's coming from a place of love and acceptance. Everything changes when you start following Jesus. My friend Carl says this. He says, distance creates distortion. See, whenever you get up close, from afar, sometimes it's hard to tell what something is, huh? Christine and I we were on vacation, and we were in Cancun, and we were on vacation, and we were sitting outside having dinner, like on the beach. It was like one of those like romantic, dinner thing. It was fantastic, okay? And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my good eye, this huge thing starts to move. And I don't really know what it is, but it's like on the beach, and it looked like a grown man was just like army crawling on the beach. And I look over, and I'm like, Christina, look. And we're looking, like, and we're trying to figure out what it is, and it looks like this massive thing is just crawling on this. I mean, it's huge. Like, it doesn't look like a little bird. It doesn't look like something small. It is massive. And it is crawling, and I'm like, what is that? And so we get up, and we start walking towards it a little bit, and we see that it's like this massive, giant, like sea turtle. and it is humongous. And it's walking along the beach, and then it goes and it starts like digging up, and it looked like it was like doing like the baby thing where it was gonna like lay eggs or something. And it's like nighttime, and I'm like, this is amazing. Now, my wife is an animal person, okay? Like, from Alaska, Pocahontas is here before you, okay? Like, in the flesh. And let me see, where are the animal people at? Animal people, you are animal people. Okay, right on. Let me see your hand, all the healthy people in the room. You're not an animal person. You're just like, you're a people. Okay, cool, right on, right. I'm not an animal person. Like, I actually believe that animals are animals. I believe that, my whole being, right? They're not people. Like, they don't talk like Disney characters when you're not there, okay? But my wife, like, starts walking towards this turtle, like this huge turtle. Like, and she starts walking towards it, right? And I can tell she's like she's going to take a picture of it. And now I'm standing like over here, and there are these people like having dinner, and she's like, oh my God, what's that lady doing? She, like, I hope she doesn't take a picture of it. And I can hear them say this. And now I'm like, babe, Christina. This is a true story. She looks at me, she's walking towards a thing, like getting ready to take a picture of it. And I'm like, babe, like, no, don't do it. Because they're like, oh, the flash can like, and I'm like, my wife loves animals. She wouldn't do anything that would knowingly hurt the animal. I'm like, Christina, I'm trying to get her attention. We're like 50 feet away. I'm like, Christina. And she literally what she does, she looks at me and she goes, she waves me off. I'm like, I can't even lead in my own home. How can I lead the church? But she had to get close. She had to see it. Man, why? Because then as soon as you get close, man, you know what something is. Distance creates distortion. I'm grateful that we serve a God that says, hey, no, come close. What's crazy to me about Jesus is that he offers friendship when he would have been completely justified just offering lordship. Jesus would have been completely justified just coming down and saying, I am Lord, bow down when I come to your town. Justified. It would have been completely appropriate. And yet Jesus says, hey, I no longer call you servants. For servants don't even know what the master does, but I now call you friends. He would walk around and say, hey, come join me. Hey, come hang out. Hey, come sit at my table. I want to sit at your table. And I'm so grateful that we serve that kind of God that says, hey, you can get close to me so that when things happen that you don't really understand, and you're unsure of why they're happening, we will be close enough that you will be able to ask me. And we will be close enough to where I can give you some understanding. And you won't have to go through something and have no clarity. But you will be so close to me that I can kind of help give some clarity to what you're going through. See, listen, not everything makes sense when you're following Jesus. But here's what I know. A lot more makes sense with Jesus than without him. A lot more makes sense that when I draw close to him and I'm close enough to where I'm leaning up against him and I can get his heart and his plan for my life. In verse 10, it goes on to say, and as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came, and they were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? A guy named Andy Stanley pastors a huge church in the Atlanta area. He wrote a book that I read years ago called Choosing to Cheat. And it was a phenomenal book. And pretty much his whole premise of the book is something in your life is going to get cheated, right? Your work is going to get cheated. Your family is going to get cheated. Like all of us only have so much time in a day. And so he says, if you're going to cheat something, like cheat the right things. So he says choosing to cheat, and he's like, develop your schedule around this. And I've seen this to be true in my own life, is that, right, my priority, my number one priority, right, is my wife and my family. If this relationship is good, then I'm a better leader and pastor and shepherd. And so he wrote this book called Choosing to Cheat. And I was thinking about it in context of this message. If I was going to write a book, as it pertains to kind of this topic of what we're talking about today, it would be called Rattle the Right Ones. Rattle the Right Ones. If you've lived any amount of time, you know this. You are going to tick somebody off. Somebody's always mad at you. Like somebody is always going to be upset at you. So you might as well choose who they are. You can't please everybody. I'm telling you, you cannot please everybody. Ask me how I know. I've tried. Come on, you ever try and like you're trying to please these people and you're trying to please these people and you're trying to please, we need a book called Rattle the Right Ones. Like if you're gonna upset somebody, man, make sure, what I love about Jesus is like he knew he was gonna upset somebody, so it might as well be the religious crew. He's like, look, no, not everybody's gonna be pleased. Okay, religious leaders, you're my crew. Right? It's crazy that Jesus was very, very okay with religious people that didn't really understand what he was doing, being upset at him. See, sometimes we have to be okay that we're not going to please every group in our life. If we're gonna model the way of Jesus, we're gonna have to be okay that we're just not everybody is gonna be happy. Listen, some of you, man, you're trying to follow Jesus and your family thinks you're in a cult. Again, ask me how I know, right? You're gonna try to pursue Jesus, and your friends aren't gonna really understand what you're doing. You're gonna try this thing out, and it's gonna be like, I'm not really sure what is going on. Can I just encourage you, man, rattle the right ones. The Pharisaic approach to purity involved active separation from sinners. So the Pharisees, what they thought, the thing that drove them crazy about Jesus is they thought purity was active, deliberate separation from them. And Jesus comes on the scene and he blows that out of the water. And what he was teaching is that there is no initiation fee to this thing. Probably one of my most nerve-wracking moments, honestly, in life right now, is whenever we give a gift to my niece or nephew and watching them open it. Probably one of the most nerve-wracking moments in my life because Christina, has two sisters and so there's always other people, right? Christina has a mom and a dad, and so they give presents too. And I gotta be honest, deep down in my soul, I always wanna be the family member that gives the best gifts. I don't know if anybody else is like that, but I'm really competitive at everything I do. And by the way, probably the best gift where I get the most fulfillment in this is when like Christina's, youngest sister, who doesn't have children yet, gives a gift to our niece and nephew, and I know she spent more money than I did. But the kids still like my present more. That's the best. That's when you've hit a home run, right? That's when you know, right? And the reason why I'm so nervous when I give them this gift, because I'm like, oh man, like I hope that they accept me. I've never wanted to be more accepted by a 6 and 7-year-old in my entire life. I'm like me, please. And I give them this gift, and when I give them the gift, what do? I watch their response. And if they drop my gift and grab Christina's sister's gift, I know that I failed. But if they just push her gift off the table and start setting up my gift, I know that victory is mine. And by the way, I tell her that too. I tell her that. Did you see what he did there? Yeah. You wanna know what's awesome with Jesus is that there is no initiation fee. So there is no threshold. Like there is no thing where we have to watch Jesus to see, hey, does he accept us? In fact, you wanna know what the initiation fee is? It's this and this alone. You accepting the invitation. That's what the initiation fee is. It's just you simply going, I accept. You simply saying, yep, I wanna sit at that table. Yep, Jesus, you accept me. It's not you have to jump through this hoop and jump through this hoop and jump through this hoop, that Jesus Christ invites you and you accepting the invitation is your acceptance. I love too, one of the things I find interesting about the Pharisees is that they ask Jesus' disciples why he's doing what he's doing. How come they just didn't ask Jesus? Isn't that interesting? Like Jesus is right there. And they go to his disciples and they're like, why does your teacher do that? They could have asked Jesus. Now, listen, this isn't ideal, but this is how it works a lot. Meaning this, that very few times will somebody that is far from God simply pursue Jesus on their own and discover him. Most of the time, they're gonna come and ask you questions. Most of the time, they're gonna come and they're gonna ask you questions. Why does your teacher do X? If your teacher's so good, then why do bad things happen to good people? If Jesus is so good, then why am I going through this? Most of the time, they're going to come to you. And so the question is do you know Jesus enough and well enough to represent him well? I mean, do you know Jesus? And can I encourage you, you don't have to know all the answers, you just have to know him. I talk to people all the time and they're discouraged and they're rattled. They're like, I don't really know like where the dinosaurs went. how do the dinosaurs fit in Genesis? Like, I don't know. But like, you don't have to know all the answers, but you have to know him. If you're going to represent him well. I want to have the team come up because I want to finish with this last thought. So Jesus overhears them. So they're trying to just ask his disciples. They're trying to catch his disciples slipping. But Jesus hears it, of course, right? Because he's God. And it says, but when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So I love what Jesus does, right? He says, first of all, he says, go and learn what this means. So what he's doing is he's putting the highest educated, theologically speaking people of his day in the go learn something corner. So he looked at like the highest educated God people in the community, and he says, hey, you need to go and learn what this means. And could you imagine if you're them, like how offended you are, like how bothered you would be by this? And so they're incredibly offended because they are clearly missing it. In fact, what Jesus references when he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, here's what he's referencing, Hosea 6:6. He's literally quoting the Old Testament, which says this, for I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. And I love this, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. See, when you aren't friends with Jesus, you can think you're speaking for him, but the only thing you really have is the letter of the law. The only thing you really have is just the letter. You don't understand the essence. You don't understand the spirit, right? Even in the Old Testament, it says, for I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. In fact, did you know sacrifice in the Old Testament, it was way more for the people than it was for God? It was about the people, right? In fact, God even said, I take no delight in your burnt offerings. It was a system that was set up which was to wean people off of sacrifice, actually, because everybody in that day would have understood sacrifice. They would have understood animal sacrifice. So, instead of like doing all this other stuff, we're gonna kind of like help wean you off of it. Oftentimes we think that the sacrifice was to please God. It wasn't to please God. It was to appease people's own conscience. And so you have Jesus says, look, man, Hosea 6:6, for I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, the knowledge of God. I wish you knew me, and I wish you didn't have to do burnt offerings. I wish you would know me. See, there's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. I think sometimes, if we're not careful, we can be really good at knowing the letter of the law. Well, the Bible says it right there. Right, we get into theological discussions and fights and we point to scripture and we use the Bible as a club rather than a love letter. And we just try to hit people over the head and we go, it says it right there. That sounds familiar. It sounds familiar. Pharisees did that all the time, right? They would show up and Jesus would heal on the Sabbath. And they're like, but it says it right there. And Jesus would say, but you've missed the essence of it. You see, the reality is, and he said this about the Sabbath. He says that Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. That the Sabbath was created to serve people. People aren't here to serve the rules. See, everything in the scriptures is designed for you and I to have the fullness of life. It's not supposed to be used to bog us down and to add more weight and to make us feel worse. It's actually meant and designed to go, man, the closer I get to Jesus, the more I understand his word, and the more I understand his word, the more I can walk in his ways, and the more I walk in his ways, I experience the fullness of life. It's amazing to me how sometimes, man, I was talking to this young man. I met with a 20-year-old. Don't you love 20-year-olds that know everything? They're the best. They're my favorite. I was meeting with him. He sent me an email. I knew it was going to be an interesting conversation because the email, said in it that, hey, I'm young, but like the church is of the utmost of importance to me. It's like, man, the church, it doesn't go to our church, but it's like the church is of the utmost, the church universal is of the utmost importance to me. I'm like, yeah, me too. I quit my job for it, but anyway. It matters to me too. And so we met. And we started doing this thing that I don't even like doing, honestly. I don't even like really like having theological debates with people that aren't like friends, to be honest, because it just gets weird. We end up fighting and arguing about dumb stuff, right? Even Paul says, be mindful that you're not like having meaningless genealogical debates and having these kind of. And so we're sitting down and we're talking about what was one of the topics? This is fun. We were talking about predestination. Talking about predestination, like a topic that really, really matters. We're sitting down and we're having a conversation, and he says, well, do you believe that like people are predestined? I'm like, yeah, I believe that Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, and anyone. And I think when Jesus said anyone, he was like, anyone. I think he meant anyone. It's like, well, yeah, but don't you believe that if God knows, then does he, if he knows, then that means does he cause it? And if he causes it, does he know it? And did he make you if he causes it? And I go, bro, honestly, this conversation means nothing to the single mom I'm getting ready to meet with that's trying to figure out how to pay her rent. It doesn't mean anything. I said, bro, all we're talking about right now is the letter of the law. That is all we're talking about. We're not talking about Jesus. We're not talking about relationship with God. We're not talking about the kindness and the love and the grace of God. We're talking about the letter of the law. And I'm telling you, this book will always rain hollow if there's no relationship with Jesus. It'll always rain hollow. In fact, I know people that read this book every day that have become angrier, not more joyful. I know people every day that read this book every day and have become more greedy, not more generous. I know people that read this book every single day and they've been more frustrated with other people instead of having empathy for people. Why? Because if you just read it for the letter of the law and you don't catch the essence of Jesus and it's outside of relationship with Jesus, then this will just be a book. But if you couple this with a relationship with Jesus, this will be the very life to your soul. This will change your whole world. This will do things that you can't imagine that it could possibly do. And then finally, one of the things I love about Jesus here is he doesn't even disagree with who these Pharisees and religious leaders say that these guys are. They're like, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Now, your and my typical reaction is to go, no, they're not that bad. That's our typical reaction. Like, I remember I was hanging out with a friend of mine who was he was my narcotics friend when I was in high school. He had a real green thumb. And he did. He was great at what he did. And I remember we were hanging out, and my mom was like, I don't like him. And I said, why don't you like him? Right? My mom had this impression of me that like I was the good kid. She's like, you got to stop hanging out with the bad kids. I'm like, Mom, I'm the bad kid. She's like, I don't like that kid. I don't think you should be hanging out with that kid. I go, why? And he goes, because I think he's a drug dealer. And I go, Mom, he's not a drug dealer. Of course he was a drug dealer. I love that Jesus, he doesn't even like go, no. They're not that bad. No, they're fine. Like they're not that bad. Jesus doesn't even pretend that the people aren't what they actually are. The reality is we are that bad. We are who we think we are. We are sinners. We fall short. We're not that great. We're not that talented. We hide. We want people to think we're better than we are. And Jesus isn't afraid of that, and he doesn't make excuses for you. He just covers it. What I love about Jesus is that he steps into our life and he doesn't call righteous people, he makes righteous people. I'm grateful that we serve a guy, he's not looking for righteous people. He makes them. He makes us righteous. And because of that, we can always know that, okay, he got the right number. You ever call the wrong number? Come on, you're like, is Tony there? Tony's not here. Do you ever feel like in relationship with Jesus, at least I do, I feel like Jesus like called the wrong number. I feel like that sometimes. Like it's like, is Andrew there? It's me, who's this? This is Yeshua. Nice to meet you, Jesus, right? Yeah, I want to use you. I want relationship with you. Okay, did you mean like Andrew Gard, G-A-R-D? Come on, you ever feel like Jesus called the wrong number when he called you? You feel like, man, if you really knew. See, what I'm so grateful of is that I know for a fact Jesus didn't call the wrong number when he called you, that he meant to call you. He has plans for you. He has hopes for you. He has dreams for you. He has thoughts about you. He has love for you. It's not an accident. He meant to dial you up. And as we draw near to God, the closer we draw near to God, the better understanding we will get of what he wants from us. Come on, let's stand to our feet, Grace City Church.